Thank you. As you heard, my name is Spencer Hunley. We're going to be talking about where do we draw the line, advocacy strategy, and tactics. So, I'm just going to start off with a little bit of an introduction here. As autistics in this present day and age, we're more out than we ever have been in recorded history. Autism is progressively becoming less and less of a whispered word. Self-advocates are growing in number. Excuse me. And what used to be a diagnosis that was cloaked in societal grief and sadness is now finally changing to be held in the warmth of acceptance, inclusion, and self-discovery, and hopefully in the future, belonging. While we still have significant struggle, it can be agreed upon that in the past 10 to 20 years, we've yielded substantial progress, but there is no shortage of work to be done. Our efforts to push for full inclusion, accessibility, and accommodations are still needed. And one look at social media, such as Facebook or Twitter alone, can confirm this. Sometimes even those in our autistic community can just make really bad decisions, ally themselves with cure-based or anti-autistic groups, or write and do things that may feel like a betrayal. So where do we really draw the line? How do we pick the right battles, make the best decisions? Our community is diverse in a myriad number of ways, from the parts of us that are immutable to our unique perspectives, beliefs, and opinions. It's understandable that we don't have one cohesive strategy nor one cohesive purpose. However, all too frequently, quite a few of us seem to lash out at any perceived slight, from someone on Facebook who truly does not know any better, to the sorry, sorry about that. To the truly gigantic behemoth organizations that repeatedly fail to be cognizant of the harm they're causing to the very people they tokenize, despite using them to raise funds. The autism mom who reposts a puzzle piece meme seems to get roughly the same vitriol as Autism Speaks or Taka. And to be blunt, this is a failure in target priority and escalation. So before we get into definitions, I'm going to quickly go over what this workshop is and isn't about. As you can see here, what it's about, we're going to be talking about strategy and tact regarding interactions with neurotypicals in the autism community. So neurotypical parents, neurotypical professionals, et cetera, that are in the autism field, as opposed to autistics in the autistic community. There are issues there, but there are larger ones when it comes to neurotypicals and this not having any understanding. Making strategic decisions with certain posts or certain emails or even in-person dialogue. Sometimes there are inflammatory or even trolling, or just a parent that is ranting because they don't know what to do and they're feeling kind of panicky and they're not getting any advice. What do we do there? How do we approach that strategically instead of just emotionally? Also a big one, managing limited resources. And this is huge because when it comes to time, money, power, influence, and even spoons, these are finite. And it's even more important that we manage them effectively because they can run out all too quickly in the face of the people that we're trying to advocate for and also advocate against, such as the big organizations. They have a lot more power and resources than we do, so managing those is incredibly important. What this is not about is being more acceptable to neurotypical society. That's not it at all. This is not trying to be nicer in an attempt to appease those that are opposed to what we're trying to do. Oftentimes you'll see this in civil rights movements. They'll be told, well, if you would just be nicer, things would be done better. Things would be, all the things you're pushing for would be done if you just be nicer about it. And that's not the case. Being nicer makes change easier to ignore, makes what you're trying to do easier for them to not pay attention to. And that's not what this is about. Finally, this is not about compromising, especially compromising our values as a community with cure-based or autism organizations that have little to no autistic leadership. That's not the case here at all. So sometimes, though, you may have to temporarily work with so those you may find intolerable, such as a parent-led group, and work with them to pass a ban on seclusion and restraint. So you both have mutual goals in that, but otherwise you wouldn't really be together on some things. But that is a goal that you both can work towards, but not compromise on. So sometimes you really can't just blaze trails and take down bigots all the time. Sometimes you have to build bridges instead of burning them. The real trick is knowing when to do either or both. So some definitions here, just kind of wanted to go over real quick. Basically, when it comes to tact, this is finding ways to discuss an issue or event or situation without directly kind of labeling it per se, not just establishing it out there in the most blunt of terms, moving the focus so that the other person is kind of less tense, more apt to converse about it. This especially applies when you're interacting with, again, parents of newly diagnosed kids, is sometimes these private conversations you can work with them on builds that camaraderie. Empathizing language that explains how they feel back to them works wonders. I know it's really weird, and I've had to work at this for a long time, but it makes a world of difference, because a lot of these parents will just start ranting about how they hate autism or they wish their kid wasn't autistic. And what you find out is that they're not even aware of what they're really ranting about. They're not even sure. Basically, you have to make them realize what they're mad about is not about autism, but about a society that is, by its very nature, non-inclusive. It's not. So being able to kind of work with that is much more productive than just saying, hey, I saw you post a puzzle piece thing. That's very offensive. Sometimes you have to do that, but other times being able to educate and open that door by saying, I understand how you feel, or here's my diagnosis, my diagnosis story, makes a world of difference with them. So tactful, as you can see, is looking at basically full of tact. That's the literal kind of definition with that. It's discerning, discreet, unobtrusively perceptive. I brought up target priority earlier. This is kind of choosing what's the most important or urgent to address. Sometimes you can't go after everything, and it sounds very militaristic, I know, but it is an efficient way of saying is you pick your targets, you pick your issues, and you have a priority with that. So sometimes they're just not of value to go after. You have other things that are a higher priority. Engagement, again, taking action with or against an organization, group, or a person. So these are just kind of definitions. I may be using these words, especially in the future. But overall, when it comes to tact and discussing strategy, this is not about making you or an organization more normal. This is about advocacy and taking steps towards you or your organization's goals. The difference here is that the utilization of tact is a tool. If you use tact as a tool to navigate the heavily broken and non-inclusive societies, professional, casual, community silos, and the whole charity complex that permeates the disability community. So this one I'm going to try to get through because there's a lot here, but identifying your goals and objectives is one of the key factors in being able to kind of draw this line. So knowing your target, kind of who they are and more, such as an organization. If you know that, for example, Next for Autism, if you know where that really came from, who they were connected with, that information is incredibly important. Also knowing who they are not. So there's kind of gray areas here when it comes to maybe you have personal or workplace connections with people that are part of these organizations, maybe you don't. Those you may need to look at as well. When it comes to taking action and when not to, sometimes with small posts, you may not need to engage. There are good examples of this, especially with social media, where if the post is not getting any action, if no one's sharing it, if no one's commenting on it, if no one's reposting it, if it's just not getting any attention, sometimes, even if it's a really inflammatory post or a really harmful one from just a viewing perspective, the best choice is to not engage. Because when it comes to these algorithms on social media, it just dies. It really doesn't go anywhere. Not many people see it, but if you do respond, if you do talk about it or repost even in a negative fashion, it will get more attention. And for the person that posted it, as well as the greater audience, if there's no reaction to that, it is much more of a reinforcer that this is not allowed or not really conducive than actually engaging with it. Because then once you reply with, well, this is the reason why this is bad, they focus singularly on you. Whether instead, if it's everyone just ignoring it, then, oh, well, I guess people don't really agree with this or they don't identify with it, and it just ends up dying. This especially works when it comes to kind of retail charitable endeavors, when you see people maybe doing fundraisers or selling things for organizations that we are opposed to. Letting that kind of die does work out really well, because then they don't do that fundraiser again because it didn't go anywhere. So sometimes also direct messaging with the person who posted it, especially if it's someone that just did a repost and didn't add anything to it, that matters more, because you can go in there and really talk with them about why they did this. Not accusatory, but to say, hey, when you posted this, it kind of made me feel kind of sad. Like I didn't feel good about this. And I know you're not trying to hurt anybody, but I got hurt by this and I was just wondering why you did this. That has a lot more qualities to it that engage with that person rather than just saying, hey, you shouldn't post this. That's not to say you shouldn't ever do this, because if that doesn't work, the next escalation would be replying to the post with a tactical, not tactical, but tactful and positive fact checking kind of thing, where if they post from, I don't know, Bill's anti-vax-autism-page.com, if you reply with posts such as, from Forbes, Washington Post, Guardian, all kinds of other pages, people, the audience is where you're looking at to actually engage with more, because they will see that and they'll realize that the whatever weird link the person originally posted, here's all this factual information from widely accepted news sources that make a major difference with this. So that's kind of where that escalation goes to: not engaging, direct messaging, replying with factual post information that allows other people to see it, saying here's what the actual facts are. Sometimes you can even bypass that person who reposted it and go to the original publisher. That sometimes works because the person who may have reposted it has no idea. They just reposted it because they thought it sounded good and they don't know. So going to the original post can kind of really hit that a little bit harder, and especially works if you have a page and you're running an organization where you can actually reply as that page. Ultimately, when you're identifying goals and objectives, it's what do you want to get out of your actions? What is your ultimate goal of this? If you're just replying just to reply because it's offensive, it's not as conducive as really focusing on what your goals are as an advocate and as an advocacy organization. To the right, you'll see here, this is called the Eisenhower box. And I use this a lot with my own advocacy organization, as well as on my own for just day-to-day tasks. So on the upper left, you have most urgent and most important. On the lower right, the box is the least urgent and least important. And you can divide up priorities and objectives or goals you have into these certain boxes, and then you kind of work off of those. Whereas the upper left is the one you want most to take care of first, and then the one in the lower right you want to take care of at last. Like, that's the lowest priority. The best thing about this box, it's not static. You can move things around, you can change things up, but this way you don't have to spend all your resources on everything. You can identify what is the most important to tackle first and go from there. That way you can use your resources most effectively.